The faint hum of the engine outside the house used to be just background noise, blending into the sounds of birds chirping and distant traffic. At first, I didn't pay much attention. People order taxis all the time. It was nothing out of the ordinary. It didn't occur to me then that it was always the same car, always the same driver. My wife, Jenna, and I had been married for 6 years. The honeymoon phase had faded into something less vibrant, but I wouldn't have called it stale. I worked long hours as a project manager at a tech firm, leaving Jenna with plenty of time to herself. She claimed she needed that freedom, the space to breathe and rediscover herself. Her part-time job as a freelance graphic designer didn't demand much, so she'd spend her days going to yoga classes, attending book clubs, or, as she put it, getting inspired. It started innocently enough. Jenna had mentioned needing a reliable ride to a gallery opening downtown one night. "You don't have to drive me," she said. "It's late and I know you've got an early meeting." I agreed without hesitation. A quick booking later, and her ride arrived, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. A man in his mid-30s stepped out to greet her. He had an easy confidence about him, dressed casually in a button-down shirt and jeans. "That's Mark," she told me when she came home later that evening, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "He's great. He even recommended a new cafe I should try. Isn't it funny how sometimes strangers know the best spots?" I nodded, distracted by an email on my laptop. If only I'd known then how much weight that name would come to carry in our lives. Over the next few weeks, Mark became a constant presence. Jenna hailed his ride for nearly every outing, and she talked about him with an enthusiasm she rarely showed for much else. "He's got such an interesting story," she said one evening over dinner. "Used to be a musician before he started driving full-time. He's got these fascinating insights about people. Like he said, he can tell so much about someone just by the way they sit in the back seat." I raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like he's got a lot of time to think." She chuckled, but there was something else in her laughter, something that lingered just a bit too long. At first, I chalked it up to Jenna being her usual self. She'd always been drawn to the novel, the exciting, the unconventional. Mark was just another fleeting interest, like her watercolor class or her brief obsession with baking elaborate desserts. But then, the ride started stretching longer. I noticed her coming home later and later, her explanations growing flimsier. "Traffic was insane," she'd say, tossing her bag onto the counter. "Downtown traffic at 11 p.m.? I asked one night, my brow furrowing. "Roadwork," she snapped back, her tone sharper than necessary. "Do you want me to call the city and complain?" I let it slide. I was tired, and arguing with Jenna was like trying to wrestle a cat into a bathtub, messy and fruitless. She had a way of twisting things, making me feel like I was overreacting. The first real crack in the facade came a few months later. I was heading out for a morning run when I spotted the black sedan idling a few houses down. Mark was inside, his arm resting casually on the open window. Jenna emerged from the house in workout gear, her hair pulled into a ponytail. She didn't see me standing there as she climbed into the passenger seat instead of the back. Something about it felt off. Why the front seat? Why not her usual spot in the back? I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was probably just more comfortable. Still, an unease settled in the pit of my stomach, one I couldn't shake no matter how hard I pounded the pavement on my run. That night, I asked her about it. "I saw Mark this morning. Didn't realize you were heading out so early." Her face tightened, just for a second, before she broke into a laugh. "Oh yeah, I was meeting Emily for a sunrise yoga class. You know how she is, always dragging me into her crazy routines." "Since when does Emily do yoga?" Jenna waved me off. "It's new. She's trying to turn over a new leaf or something." It was an answer, but not a satisfying one. I'd met Emily enough times to know she wasn't the sunrise yoga type. Jenna's voice was too quick, her explanation too polished, like she'd rehearsed it. As the days turned into weeks, the sedan appeared more frequently. I started keeping mental notes, how often it showed up, how long it stayed. Sometimes it was an hour, sometimes more. Once, I saw it at nearly midnight when I'd stepped out to grab something from the car. It felt intrusive, invasive even, to track her this way, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. And yet I still didn't act. I didn't confront her. Maybe I didn't want to believe what was becoming increasingly clear. Jenna was good at keeping me off balance, at making me feel like I was the one losing my grip. If I questioned her, she'd laugh and call me jealous or controlling. If I didn't, the pit in my stomach grew deeper, heavier. One Friday evening, Jenna announced she'd be heading out for a late-night networking event downtown. She said it was a chance to meet potential clients for her design work. I offered to drive her. It had been weeks since we'd spent any real time together, and I thought the ride might help us reconnect. "No need," she replied quickly, a little too quickly. "Mark's got me covered. I don't want you to feel obligated, especially after the week you've had." I hesitated, searching her face for something, anything, that would settle the doubts swirling in my mind. Her smile was bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. "All right," I relented. "Have fun." She kissed my cheek, grabbed her purse, and practically skipped out the door. I watched as the black sedan pulled up, Mark stepping out to greet her with a familiarity that made my jaw tighten. They exchanged a few words, then laughter. She slid into the passenger seat, and they drove off. The house felt oppressively quiet after she left. I tried distracting myself with work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Jenna. Something wasn't adding up. For the first time, I felt compelled to dig deeper. I opened her laptop, something I'd never done before, and searched for her emails or calendar entries. Nothing about a networking event appeared. Then I checked her phone, which she'd left charging in the kitchen. No texts or recent calls from anyone who seemed remotely work-related, just a string of messages between her and a contact named Mark D. I hesitated for a moment before opening the thread. The first few messages were harmless enough, pickup times, addresses, the occasional small talk. But as I scrolled further back, the tone shifted. "Mark, last night was amazing. You looked stunning. Jenna, you're sweet. I can't stop thinking about it either." My heart sank. The back and forth continued, growing more intimate with every line. There were plans to meet, flirty banter, and a few late-night messages that left no room for doubt. I set the phone down, my hands trembling. My instincts had been right all along. But even with the proof staring me in the face, part of me wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation. Maybe there was some other context I didn't understand. Maybe I was missing something. Then again, deep down, I knew exactly what was going on. Hours passed, and Jenna still wasn't home. My anger simmered as I paced the living room, each tick of the clock amplifying my frustration. Finally, I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed my keys and drove toward the downtown area, unsure of what I'd do when I found her, but determined to see for myself. I circled the blocks near the trendy bars and restaurants Jenna frequented. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted the black sedan parked in a dimly lit alley. My stomach twisted. Drawing closer, I saw movement inside the car. My breath hitched as I made out two figures in the front seat. Jenna was straddling Mark, her hands gripping his shoulders, her head thrown back in a way that sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. I froze, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. The scene felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare, it was real, and it was happening right in front of me. I slammed the horn, the sound piercing through the quiet alley. Jenna jerked back, her face a mixture of shock and panic as she locked eyes with me. Mark scrambled to adjust his shirt, his expression shifting from smug confidence to unease. Jenna stumbled out of the car, her hair disheveled, her face flushed. "What the hell, Evan?" she yelled, as if I were the one in the wrong. I stepped out of my car, my fists clenched at my sides. "What the hell?" I repeated, my voice cold. "That's all you have to say? You've been lying to me for months, and now this." Her expression twisted, the hysteria bubbling to the surface. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's not what it looks like." I let out a humorless laugh. "Not what it looks like. I just watched you practically rip his clothes off." She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms defensively. "You're such a controlling asshole, Evan. I can't even have friends without you stalking me." "Friends?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Is that what you call this? Friends don't grope each other in parked cars." Mark, who had been silent up to this point, muttered something about leaving. He started the car, but I stepped in front of it, forcing him to stop. "You're not going anywhere," I said through gritted teeth. Not until you tell me how long this has been going on. Jenna groaned, throwing her hands in the air. Oh, for God's sake, Evan, why does it matter? You're never around. You're always working or glued to your laptop. Maybe if you paid attention to me once in a while, I wouldn't have to find someone else who does. Her words were like daggers, each one driving deeper than the last. I stood there, stunned, as she turned the blame on me, twisting the knife with every sentence. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Look, man, I didn't mean... Shut up, I barked, cutting him off. Just shut the hell up. I turned back to Jenna, my voice trembling with fury. We're done. Do you hear me? Done. She scoffed, but there was a flicker of panic in her eyes. Oh, don't be so melodramatic. You're not going to leave me. Watch me. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but it was the only way to keep them from shaking. Jenna's words echoed in my head, each one a reminder of how far we'd drifted from the life we'd built together. I got home before she did. That wasn't surprising. She rarely rushed when it came to me. The silence of the house was suffocating, the emptiness a mirror of how I felt inside. For the first time in years, I sat on the edge of our bed and realized I didn't want to be there anymore. Not with her. Not in a life filled with lies. When Jenna finally walked through the door, it was past midnight. She didn't look ashamed. If anything, she seemed annoyed, like I'd inconvenienced her evening. Are you done sulking? She asked, tossing her purse onto the counter. Because this whole act is getting old. I stood, meeting her gaze with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. I'm filing for divorce. She froze, the smirk falling from her face. Excuse me? You heard me, I said, my voice steady. This isn't just about tonight, Jenna. It's everything. The lies, the gaslighting, the disrespect. I'm done. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then the hysterics began. You're throwing away 6 years of marriage over one stupid mistake, she shrieked, her voice climbing with each word. Do you even hear yourself? You're pathetic, Evan. You can't just give up because things got hard. Hard, I repeated, incredulous. You didn't even try. You went behind my back, Jenna. You let someone else into our lives, into our relationship. That's not hard. That's betrayal. She let out a bitter laugh, pacing the living room like a caged animal. Oh, please. You think you're so perfect? Always working, always too busy for me. You act like this is all my fault, but you were never there, Evan. Never. Don't you dare pin this on me, I snapped. I worked to give us a good life. I trusted you. I loved you. And this is how you repay me. Her face twisted with anger. You're such a martyr. Always the victim. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have needed someone else to make me feel alive. The words stung more than I cared to admit, but I didn't let her see it. I refused to give her the satisfaction. Say whatever you want, I said, grabbing my jacket from the chair. Blame me. Insult me. Lie to yourself. But it doesn't change the fact that I'm done. I'll be meeting with a lawyer on Monday. Good luck finding someone who'll put up with you, she spat as I walked toward the door. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I spent the night at a hotel, the quiet anonymity of the room a welcome relief. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Jenna, alternating between pleas for forgiveness and venomous accusations. I turned it off and stared at the ceiling, wondering how I'd let things get so bad. Morning came too quickly. I checked out of the hotel and headed to a nearby cafe, nursing a black coffee as I made a list of everything that needed to be done. Finding a lawyer, separating finances, figuring out the logistics of moving out. It felt overwhelming, but I was determined to follow through. Halfway through my coffee, my phone rang. I hesitated before answering. It was Jenna. What do you want? I asked, my tone flat. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice softer than it had been in months. Can you come home? Please. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the lingering hope that she'd finally take responsibility for what she'd done. Either way, I found myself driving back to the house. When I walked in, she was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and her hands fidgeting with a mug of tea. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Thanks for coming, she said, her eyes darting to mine before quickly looking away. I know I've been awful. I don't want to lose you. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. You should have thought about that before you climbed into Mark's car. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. I swear, Evan, I was lonely, and he made me feel special. Special, I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You destroyed our marriage for someone who makes you feel special. She winced. It was a mistake. I know that now. I don't want to throw everything away. We can fix this. We can go to therapy, work through it. I shook my head, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just some rough patch, Jenna. You didn't trip and fall into his arms. You made a choice, over and over again. And now I'm making mine. Her expression shifted, the vulnerability replaced with something colder. You're seriously doing this? She asked, her voice sharp. You're really going to walk away? I already have, I said, turning to leave. As I reached the door, her voice stopped me in my tracks. You'll regret this, Evan. You'll see. I didn't respond. The sound of the door closing behind me was the most satisfying thing I'd heard in years. The first few days after leaving were a whirlwind of emotion. I fluctuated between relief and rage, sadness and determination. I moved into a short-term rental apartment, one of those furnished places that felt sterile and impersonal. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a space untouched by Jenna's lies. My phone buzzed constantly. Jenna was relentless, texting, calling, leaving voicemails. Sometimes she apologized, promising to change, to be better. Other times, she unleashed her fury, accusing me of being heartless, selfish, or worse. I ignored her, focusing instead on taking the next steps to end the marriage. I called a lawyer recommended by a colleague, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Karen. During our initial meeting, she laid out everything I needed to know: division of assets, how to protect myself legally, and the best way to handle Jenna's inevitable backlash. She's not going to make this easy, I told Karen, recounting the way Jenna could flip from sweet to savage in an instant. They rarely do, Karen replied, her tone matter-of-fact. But you're doing the right thing. The sooner we start the process, the sooner you can move on. That night, I sent Jenna a brief text. I filed for divorce. My lawyer will be in touch. Please respect my boundaries and direct any questions to her. The response was immediate and explosive. Jenna, you're seriously doing this? You can't even talk to me like a man? Me? We've talked, Jenna. I've made my decision. Jenna, you're throwing everything away. You're going to regret this. Me? I already regret trusting you. She didn't reply after that, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of hope that she might finally accept it. But Jenna wasn't the type to go quietly. The next day, I came home from work to find her sitting outside my apartment building, leaning against her car with her arms crossed. My stomach tightened at the sight of her. She looked disheveled, her hair pulled into a messy ponytail, her face pale. But her eyes still held that same fire, the same determination to bend the situation to her will. You're avoiding me, she said as I approached. I told you to respect my boundaries, I replied, keeping my voice even. This isn't the way to fix anything. I don't care about your stupid boundaries, she snapped. We need to talk. We've already talked. There's nothing left to say. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Please, Evan, just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against my better judgment, I sighed and gestured toward the nearby coffee shop. 5 minutes, I said. That's it. We sat at a small table near the window. Jenna fidgeted with the lid of her coffee cup, her gaze darting around the room before finally settling on me. I'm sorry, she began, her voice trembling. For everything. I messed up and I know that. But can we try to work through this? We've been through so much together. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It did, I said quietly. But you threw it away. Her face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might actually cry. But then she straightened, her expression hardening. You don't get to play the victim here, Evan. You're not perfect. You ignored me for years, buried yourself in work, and left me to figure things out on my own. I worked hard for us, Jenna. I said, my voice rising slightly. I trusted you, and you repaid me by sneaking around with someone else. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You're so black and white about everything. People make mistakes, Evan. That doesn't mean you just throw them away. This isn't a mistake, I shot back. It's a pattern, and I'm done being a part of it. Jenna stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving me sitting there, exhausted and frustrated. I watched her car speed away, wondering how I'd ever let things get to this point. The next week was quiet, too quiet. Jenna stopped calling, stopped showing up unannounced. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd finally given up. But then, the real chaos began. It started with small things. My credit card company called to report unusual activity. A string of charges at luxury boutiques and spas, all made with the card Jenna and I had once shared. I immediately canceled it and notified my lawyer. Classic move, Karen said when I told her. She's trying to get as much as she can before the divorce is finalized. Don't worry, we'll handle it. Then came the social media posts. Jenna took to Facebook and Instagram, crafting a narrative that painted her as the wronged wife abandoned by her cold, unloving husband. She posted photos of us from happier times, accompanied by captions like, 6 years of love, thrown away in an instant. I gave him everything, and this is how he repays me. Mutual friends began reaching out, some cautiously asking what had happened, others openly taking sides. It was humiliating, but I refused to engage. Karen advised me to document everything, and I did: screenshots, emails, text messages. If Jenna wanted to play dirty, I'd be ready. The final straw came when I returned to my apartment one evening to find the door unlocked. My stomach dropped as I stepped inside. The place was a mess, drawers pulled out, papers scattered, my laptop missing. There, on the coffee table, was a note in Jenna's handwriting. I just wanted to grab a few things. Don't overreact. I stared at the note, anger coursing through me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The violation of my space hit me harder than I'd expected. Jenna's note, smug and dismissive, was just another slap in the face. She didn't care about boundaries, about respect, about anything that didn't serve her own interests. My lawyer, Karen, was livid when I told her. She entered your home without permission. That's breaking and entering, Karen said, her tone sharp. We'll add it to the case. Change your locks immediately. That night, I called a locksmith. The guy worked quickly, and by the time he left, I had new keys and a reinforced sense of security. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. Jenna wasn't the type to back down, and I knew she'd find another way to push my buttons. Sure enough, the next morning brought another surprise. As I walked out to my car, I noticed something odd. At first, I couldn't place it, but then I saw the scratch, deep and jagged, running the entire length of the driver's side. I clenched my jaw, the frustration bubbling beneath my calm exterior. I immediately took photos and sent them to Karen. This is harassment, she said when I called. You'll need to file a police report. It'll help build a case if we need a restraining order. The thought of involving the police made my stomach turn, but Karen was right. Jenna was escalating, and if I didn't act now, there was no telling what she'd do next. I filed the report that afternoon, the officer taking down my statement with a sympathetic nod. That evening, Jenna called me. Against my better judgment, I answered. What do you want? I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. I just want to talk, she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. Why are you making this so difficult, Evan? We could handle this like adults, but instead, you're turning it into some kind of war. I'm turning this into a war? I laughed bitterly. You slashed my car, Jenna. You broke into my apartment. How exactly is that handling things like an adult? Oh, don't be so dramatic, she snapped. I didn't slash your car. And as for the apartment, I just needed a few things. It's not like I took anything important. You stole my laptop, I reminded her. There was a brief pause before she said, I was going to give it back. Don't act like it's a big deal. It is a big deal, Jenna, I said, my patience wearing thin. You're crossing every line imaginable. This is why we're done. You don't respect me or my boundaries. Her tone shifted, the sweetness replaced by venom. You're such a sanctimonious prick, Evan. You think you're better than me, don't you? Well, guess what? You're not. You're just a coward who can't handle a real relationship. Goodbye, Jenna, I said, hanging up before she could say anything else. I blocked her number immediately after. The next few days were quiet, but it felt like the calm before a storm. I focused on work, trying to regain a sense of normalcy, but my mind kept drifting back to Jenna. Every time I walked into my apartment, I half expected to find her there, waiting to unleash another tirade. Every time I went to my car, I checked for new damage. The tension was exhausting. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Karen. "You're not going to like this," she said, her voice tight. Jenna filed a countersuit. "What?" I asked, my stomach dropping. "On what grounds?" "She's claiming emotional distress and financial dependence. Basically, she's arguing that the divorce is leaving her destitute and that you've been abusive." "Abusive?" I repeated, stunned. "She's lying. I've never—" "I know," Karen interrupted. "But she's playing dirty, and unfortunately, the court has to take these claims seriously, even if they're baseless. Don't worry, we'll counter it. But you need to be prepared for a fight." The weight of her words settled heavily on my shoulders. Jenna's lies were escalating, and now she was dragging my name through the mud in a legal setting. It was no longer just about ending the marriage. It was about defending my character, my reputation. That evening, I received an email from an old mutual friend, Lisa. She'd seen Jenna's latest social media post and wanted to check in. "I don't know what's going on between you two," Lisa wrote, "but Jenna's saying some pretty harsh things about you. She's claiming you abandoned her with no money and that you've been emotionally abusive for years. It doesn't sound like the Evan I know, but I thought you should be aware." I stared at the screen, my anger and disbelief mounting. Jenna wasn't just lying to the courts. She was spreading those lies to everyone we knew. My hands hovered over the keyboard, tempted to fire off a rebuttal, but I stopped myself. Engaging would only add fuel to the fire. Instead, I forwarded the email to Karen and made a mental note to document every interaction with Jenna moving forward. If she wanted a war, I'd be ready. As I lay in bed that night, the events of the past weeks played over in my mind like a broken record. The betrayal, the lies, the escalating hostility, it all felt surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Jenna control the narrative. This was my life, and I was determined to take it back. The next few weeks were consumed by meetings with my lawyer, gathering evidence, and bracing myself for Jenna's next move. Karen was relentless, combing through every detail to build a solid case against Jenna's claims. My phone remained silent. Jenna had taken the hint after I blocked her number, but the silence felt more ominous than peaceful. The countersuit was a low blow, even for Jenna. Her allegations of emotional abuse and financial abandonment were entirely fabricated, but the claims could damage my reputation if left unchallenged. Karen reassured me we had the evidence to disprove her lies, but the idea of standing in a courtroom, my private life laid bare, made my stomach churn. One morning, Karen called with an update. "You're not going to like this," she said, her tone grave. "Jenna's lawyer filed a request for a temporary restraining order against you." My heart stopped. "A restraining order? On what grounds?" "She's claiming you've been harassing her, stalking her, threatening her, showing up uninvited. It's completely fabricated, but it's a tactic to make you look bad in court. We'll fight it, but you need to be extra careful from now on. Don't go near her, or anywhere she's likely to be." I was stunned. The audacity of her lies left me speechless. Not only had I avoided Jenna entirely since leaving, but she was the one who had broken into my apartment and damaged my car. Karen continued, "This is about control. She's trying to paint herself as the victim and put you on the defensive. But we'll turn this around. Just keep your head down, document everything, and trust the process." The restraining order request added another layer of complexity to the case. I had to submit evidence proving I hadn't been anywhere near Jenna since leaving, including timestamps from my work badge and GPS records from my car. Karen was thorough, compiling a timeline that refuted Jenna's claims point by point. Despite my frustration, I felt a grim sense of determination. If Jenna wanted to play dirty, I'd meet her head-on with facts, not lies. Meanwhile, Jenna's social media campaign against me continued. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, some expressing sympathy, others demanding answers. I quickly learned who I could trust and who had bought into Jenna's narrative. One evening, I received a message from a mutual acquaintance, Dave. He was never particularly close to either of us, but had always been a straight shooter. "Hey man," his message read. "I don't know what's going on between you and Jenna, but she's been telling people some wild stuff. I ran into her the other night, and she was with some guy. I think it's that driver she's always talking about. Anyway, she didn't look like someone who's been abandoned. Just thought you should know." I stared at the message, the pieces clicking into place. Jenna wasn't just lying about me. She was parading her new relationship around while pretending to be the victim. The hypocrisy was staggering, but it also gave me an idea. At my next meeting with Karen, I brought up the message from Dave. "Is there any way we can use this?" I asked. "If she's claiming emotional distress, but openly flaunting her relationship, doesn't that hurt her case?" Karen smiled, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "Absolutely. If we can get proof, photos, witness statements, anything, it'll undermine her claims. I'll have a private investigator look into it." The thought of hiring a PI felt extreme, but Karen assured me it was standard practice in cases like this. "Jenna opened the door with her lies," she said. "We're just walking through it." The investigator worked quickly. Within a week, Karen called me in her office with an update. "You're going to want to see this," she said, handing me a folder. Inside were photos of Jenna and Mark, laughing over drinks, holding hands, even kissing in public. One image showed them entering Mark's apartment late at night. Another captured them exiting the next morning, disheveled but smiling. "This is gold," Karen said. "Not only does it disprove her claims of emotional devastation, but it shows she's been dishonest with the court. This will go a long way in discrediting her." Seeing the photos was bittersweet. On one hand, it was vindicating to have proof of Jenna's hypocrisy. On the other, it was a painful reminder of how little our marriage had meant to her. With the evidence in hand, Karen filed a motion to dismiss Jenna's restraining order request and submitted the photos as part of our case. Jenna's lawyer tried to argue that the relationship with Mark was irrelevant, but the judge disagreed. The temporary restraining order was denied, and Jenna's credibility took a significant hit. I left the courtroom that day feeling a small sense of victory. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time I felt like I had the upper hand. That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of whiskey, staring out the window of my apartment. The city lights stretched endlessly, a reminder of how vast and unpredictable life could be. I didn't know what the future held, but I was finally starting to believe I'd come out of this stronger. Jenna might have started this war, but I was determined to finish it. The fallout from the courtroom victory rippled through every corner of my life. Jenna, who had been so sure of her ability to manipulate the narrative, was now scrambling to recover. Her social media rants became more erratic, the posts alternating between pleas for sympathy and thinly veiled attacks on me. Meanwhile, mutual friends who had distanced themselves started reaching out, apologizing for believing her lies. "Jenna's losing it," one friend messaged me. "She's telling everyone you ruined her life, but now people are starting to see through it. Stay strong, man." It was a small comfort, knowing the truth was finally coming to light, but I still had to deal with the practical realities of the divorce. Karen was relentless in her pursuit of a fair settlement, using every piece of evidence we'd gathered to discredit Jenna's claims and push for a swift resolution. One morning, I received an unexpected call from Jenna's lawyer. "Mr. Evans," he began, his tone measured. "I wanted to reach out personally to discuss a potential settlement." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden shift in tone. "I thought Jenna was set on dragging this out," I replied. "She was," he admitted. "But after recent developments, she's reconsidering her position." It didn't take a genius to figure out what recent developments meant. Jenna's credibility had taken a massive hit in court, and the photos of her with Mark had destroyed any chance of her playing the victim. She was running out of options, and she knew it. "What's she offering?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "We're proposing a clean break, division of assets, no alimony, no further claims from either party. She's willing to walk away if you agree to the terms." I paused, considering his words. On paper, it sounded reasonable, but after everything Jenna had put me through, I wasn't ready to let her off the hook so easily. I'll need to discuss this with my lawyer, I said, but I'm not inclined to reward her behavior. Understood, he said, sounding resigned. Just let us know. Karen's reaction was predictable. She's bluffing, she said, leaning back in her chair. She knows she's backed into a corner, and she's hoping you'll settle to avoid more drama. She doesn't deserve an easy out, I said, my voice firm. Not after everything she's done. I agree, Karen said. But we also need to think strategically. Dragging this out will cost more time and money, and while we've got the upper hand, there's always a risk when you go to court. If we can negotiate better terms, it might be worth considering. I nodded, trusting Karen's judgment. Push back, I said. Let's see how serious she is about settling. Over the next few weeks, the negotiations played out like a game of chess. Jenna's lawyer tried to argue for a more favorable division of assets, claiming she was entitled to a larger share because of her financial dependence. Karen countered with proof of her relationship with Mark, highlighting her ability to support herself if she chose to. The back and forth was exhausting, but it became clear that Jenna was losing ground. Her demands grew smaller with each round of negotiations, her bravado fading as the reality of her situation set in. Then, out of nowhere, Jenna showed up at my apartment. I was sitting on the couch, halfway through a movie, when the doorbell rang. My stomach tightened as I looked through the peephole and saw her standing there, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice cold. "I need to talk to you," she said, her tone uncharacteristically subdued. "Can I come in?" "No," I said firmly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor before meeting mine. I don't want it to end like this, Evan. I know I've made mistakes, but can't we at least try to fix things? For old time's sake?" I stared at her, disbelief and anger warring within me. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "After everything you've done, lying, cheating, dragging my name through the mud, you think there's anything left to fix?" Her face twisted, the pleading replaced by anger. "You're such a self-righteous bastard," she snapped. "You act like you're so perfect, but you're just as much to blame for this as I am." "Get out, Jenna," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm done with this conversation." She glared at me, her hands clenched into fists. "You'll regret this," she said through gritted teeth. "You'll see." "Maybe," I replied, stepping back and closing the door in her face. "But at least I'll be free." The encounter left me shaken, but it also solidified my resolve. Jenna's attempts to manipulate me were growing desperate, but they only served to remind me why I'd made the decision to leave. I poured myself a drink and sat back down on the couch, staring out the window at the city lights. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. The end was finally in sight. A week passed without incident after Jenna's unannounced visit. I threw myself into work, avoiding the chaos of the divorce as much as I could. Karen kept me updated on the negotiations, and it seemed like Jenna's side was inching closer to conceding. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't finished stirring the pot. That feeling was confirmed one Friday afternoon when I received a call from my building manager. "Mr. Evans," he began hesitantly, "there was an incident involving your ex-wife." "What kind of incident?" I asked, my stomach sinking. She showed up in the lobby and refused to leave. She started yelling, demanding to be led up to your apartment. We had to call the police to escort her out. I pinched the bridge of my nose, the tension in my head building. "Was anything damaged?" "No, but it was quite a scene," he said. "We've banned her from the property, but I thought you should know." "Thanks for letting me know," I said, hanging up and leaning back in my chair. Jenna's behavior was spiraling further out of control, and I was running out of patience. When I told Karen about the incident, she wasn't surprised. "She's escalating because she knows she's losing," she said. "It's a classic move, but this could work in our favor. Her erratic behavior is only hurting her case." "What should I do?" I asked. "Document everything," Karen said. "And if she shows up again, call the police immediately. The more evidence we have, the better." That evening, I changed my daily routine, taking different routes home, parking in a new spot, and keeping an eye out for Jenna's car. It felt excessive, but I wasn't willing to take any chances. The next bombshell came in the form of a letter from Jenna's lawyer. Karen called me into her office to go over it, her expression unreadable as she handed me the document. She's filing for spousal support, Karen said, claiming she can't sustain her lifestyle without your financial help. Istede her, dumbfunde. Are you kidding me? She's living with Mark. How can she argue she's struggling when she's got him? She's claiming they're not in a serious relationship, Karen said, her lips curling into a smirk. But we've got proof that says otherwise. Those photos of her and Mark will be critical in shutting this down. Despite Karen's confidence, the idea of Jenna trying to squeeze more money out of me made my blood boil. She'd already taken so much, my trust, my peace of mind, and now she wanted to drain my bank account too? Can we fight this? I asked, clenching my fists. Absolutely, Karen said. This is a long shot on her part, and we'll make sure the court sees it for what it is, a desperate attempt to hold on to control. 2 weeks later, we were back in court. Jenna sat across the room, her expression a mix of defiance and desperation. Mark wasn't there, of course. She likely didn't want to risk him being called as a witness. But the photos Karen had collected painted a clear picture of their relationship, one that contradicted Jenna's claims of financial hardship. The hearing was tense, but the judge didn't need much convincing. Jenna's request for spousal support was denied, and Karen even managed to secure a motion for Jenna to cover part of my legal fees. A small but satisfying victory. Jenna's reaction was as volatile as expected. As we left the courtroom, she cornered me in the hallway, her voice low and venomous. You think you've won, don't you? She hissed. But this isn't over. I'll make sure you pay for what you've done. I didn't rise to the bait. Good luck with that, I said, walking away without looking back. The end was finally within reach. With Jenna's spousal support request denied and her credibility in shambles, the negotiations shifted dramatically in my favor. Karen pushed for a settlement that left me with the bulk of our assets, arguing that Jenna's behavior had caused undue emotional and financial strain. Jenna's lawyer, clearly eager to close the case, eventually agreed. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Karen handed me the final paperwork with a small smile. It's over, she said. You're officially free. The relief was overwhelming. I thanked Karen for her hard work and left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. The divorce hadn't just been about ending my marriage. It had been about reclaiming my life, my sense of self. That evening, I went out with a few close friends to celebrate. Over drinks, I told them about my plans for the future, traveling, focusing on my career, maybe even taking up a hobby or two. You deserve it, man, one of them said, clinking his glass against mine. Here's to new beginnings. As I walked home that night, the city lights felt brighter, the air crisper. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The days following the finalization of the divorce felt surreal. For months, my life had been consumed by drama, anger, and uncertainty. Now, with the dust finally settling, I was left with a quiet I hadn't experienced in years. It was both liberating and unnerving. I spent the first week cleaning out my apartment, purging anything that reminded me of Jenna. The few items she'd left behind went straight into the trash. I wasn't interested in holding on to souvenirs from a marriage that had turned toxic. As I worked, I felt a sense of clarity returning, like I was reclaiming my space and my life. One evening, as I sifted through an old box of keepsakes, I came across a photo of Jenna and me from our honeymoon. We were on a beach in Maui, smiling at the camera, the sun setting behind us. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to reconcile the happy couple in the photo with the people we had become. Without hesitation, I ripped the photo in half and tossed it into the trash. That chapter of my life was over. The following weekend, I joined a hiking group on a whim. It was something I'd always wanted to do, but never got around to. Jenna had hated outdoor activities, calling them boring and pointless. Now, I didn't have to factor her preferences into my decisions. The group met at a trailhead just outside the city. It was a mixed crowd, young professionals, retirees, and a handful of couples. I felt a little out of place at first, but as the hike progressed, I found myself enjoying the camaraderie. There was something refreshing about being surrounded by strangers who didn't know anything about my past. By the time we reached the summit, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. The view was breathtaking. Rolling hills stretching into the horizon, the city skyline a distant blur. As I stood there, taking it all in, I realized I was finally starting to move forward. The next few weeks were filled with small but significant milestones. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with during my marriage. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned, photography, reading, even cooking. For the first time in a long time, I was living for myself. Work became a refuge, too. I threw myself into new projects, earning praise from my boss and colleagues. The sense of purpose and stability was a welcome contrast to the chaos I'd endured with Jenna. One evening, as I was scrolling through my phone, a notification from social media popped up. Jenna had posted another long, melodramatic status, this time lamenting how some people can just walk away without a second thought. The comments were a mix of sympathy and skepticism, with a few people subtly calling her out for her behavior. I couldn't help but laugh. Jenna's desperation was evident, but I didn't feel anger or frustration anymore, just pity. She was still trying to control the narrative, still clinging to the past. But I had moved on, and her words no longer had power over me. Then, one day, I received an unexpected email from someone named Claire. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but I think we need to talk." Curious, I opened the email. It was brief but packed a punch. "Yaban. My name is Claire. I don't know if you remember me, but I was Mark's girlfriend until recently. I found your email through a mutual connection and felt compelled to reach out. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what Jenna put you through. I had no idea she and Mark were involved until I found messages between them. He tried to deny it at first, but it was obvious. I ended things immediately. If you ever want to compare notes or just talk, let me know. I thought you deserved to know you weren't the only one they hurt. Best, Claire." I stared at the email, a mix of shock and vindication coursing through me. Jenna and Mark's betrayal had rippled outward, hurting more than just me. But Claire's message also reminded me that I wasn't alone, that other people understood what it felt like to be lied to, manipulated, and betrayed. I debated whether to respond. Part of me wanted to leave it in the past, to let sleeping dogs lie. But another part of me was curious. Maybe hearing Claire's side of the story would bring me some closure. In the end, I replied with a simple note. Claire, thank you for reaching out. I'm sorry for what you went through too. It sounds like Mark and Jenna left quite a trail of destruction behind them. I'd be happy to talk sometime. Maybe we can help each other make sense of it all. Take care, Evan." As I hit send, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking back with regret or anger. Instead, I was looking forward toward healing, growth, and whatever came next. A few days after sending the email, Claire and I arranged to meet at a quiet cafe downtown. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I figured hearing her side of the story might provide some clarity, or at least confirm that I wasn't the only one who had been blindsided by Jenna and Mark. I arrived early, nursing a cup of coffee while I waited. When Claire walked in, I recognized her immediately from the few photos Jenna had once shown me during her incessant gushing about Mark's friends. She was petite, with auburn hair and a warm smile that didn't quite mask the tired look in her eyes. "Evan," she asked, her voice tentative. "That's me," I said, standing to shake her hand. "Thanks for reaching out." She smiled faintly as she sat down. "Thanks for agreeing to meet. I wasn't sure if you'd want to. I almost didn't, I admitted, but I figured it might help to compare notes." Her smile grew, and for the first time, I noticed the spark of humor behind her exhaustion. "I guess we got a lot to talk about." We spent the next hour trading stories. Claire told me how she and Mark had been together for 3 years, living together for 2. She'd always thought they were happy, until she stumbled across a string of late-night messages between him and Jenna. "I confronted him," Claire said, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. "At first, he denied it, said they were just friends. But the messages, they weren't exactly subtle." I nodded, my jaw tightening as I remembered Jenna's web of lies. "Sound familiar?" She told me the same thing when I started to get suspicious. "He's just a friend." Turns out, she was spending more time with him than she was with me. Claire sighed, leaning back in her chair. "The worst part is how smug he was about it. When I kicked him out, he actually tried to make me feel guilty, like I was overreacting, as if cheating wasn't a big deal. Jenna did the same thing, I said. She called me controlling, said I didn't pay enough attention to her. It was like she couldn't admit she'd done anything wrong. We shared a bitter laugh, the shared experience forging an unspoken bond. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in my anger, my frustration. Claire understood exactly what I'd been through, because she'd been through it too. As the conversation went on, I found myself opening up more than I'd expected. I told Claire about the night I caught Jenna and Mark together, about the lies, the gaslighting, the court battles. She listened intently, nodding at all the right moments. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," she said when I finished. "It's horrible how they made us question ourselves, like we were the crazy ones." "Yeah," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "But in a way, I'm glad it's over. I can finally start moving on." Claire smiled softly. "Me too. It's been a rough few months, but I'm starting to feel like myself again. And meeting you, it's nice to talk to someone who gets it." "Likewise," I said. "It's a weird kind of solidarity, isn't it? Being betrayed by the same people." "Very weird," she agreed, laughing. "But also kind of comforting." We talked for another hour, the conversation drifting to lighter topics, our hobbies, work, plans for the future. Claire was an interior designer, passionate about her craft and eager to throw herself back into work. I told her about my recent hiking trip, how I was rediscovering the things I'd put on hold during my marriage. By the time we parted ways, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Claire and I exchanged numbers, agreeing to stay in touch. It wasn't about romance or even friendship, necessarily. Just two people helping each other navigate the aftermath of betrayal. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I kept in touch, meeting occasionally for coffee or a walk in the park. Each time, we talked less about Jenna and Mark and more about ourselves. Our goals, our dreams, the people we wanted to become now that we were free from toxic relationships. One evening, after a particularly long conversation, Claire looked at me and said, "You know, I think we're going to be okay." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words. "Yeah," I said. "I think so too." Jenna and Mark faded further into the background as time went on. Occasionally, I'd hear about them through mutual acquaintances, how Jenna had moved in with Mark, how their relationship was already showing cracks. But I didn't care. Their drama was no longer my problem. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life, piece by piece. And with every step forward, I felt stronger, more certain of who I was and what I wanted. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm. The chaos of the divorce felt like a distant memory, a storm that had finally passed. I threw myself into my work and hobbies, savoring the freedom of a life unburdened by lies and betrayal. Claire and I kept in touch sporadically. We weren't close friends, but there was a quiet understanding between us, a shared resilience that didn't require constant contact. Our occasional meetups felt more like check-ins, a way to remind each other that we were still standing, still moving forward. One Saturday morning, I decided to tackle a project I'd been putting off for weeks, redecorating my apartment. The sterile, impersonal furniture of my temporary rental was starting to feel like a reminder of the upheaval I'd gone through. It was time to make the space my own. I spent the day rearranging furniture, hanging artwork, and assembling a new bookshelf I'd picked up at a local store. By the time I was done, the place felt warmer, more like a home. For the first time in months, I felt truly settled. That evening, Claire texted me out of the blue. "Claire, hey, hope you're doing well. Just wanted to share some good news. I landed a big client this week." "Me? That's amazing. Congrats." "Claire, things felt like a big win after everything. How about you? How's life treating you?" I hesitated for a moment before replying. "Me? Not bad. Finally finished redecorating my place today. Feels like a fresh start." "Claire, love that. You'll have to send me pics. I'm curious to see what you've done." We exchanged a few more messages before saying goodnight. As I set my phone down, I couldn't help but smile. It was nice to have someone in my corner, even if our connection had come from such a strange and painful place. The next few weeks brought more positive changes. I started running again, something I hadn't done since my early 20s. It was a way to clear my head, to let the rhythm of my steps and the steady cadence of my breath drown out any lingering doubts or frustrations. One morning, while running through the park, I spotted a familiar face, Claire. She was sitting on a bench, her sketchpad balanced on her lap. I slowed to a stop, catching my breath as I approached. "Fancy meeting you here," I said, grinning. She looked up surprised, then smiled. "Hey, what are the odds?" We chatted for a while, catching up on the small details of our lives. Claire told me about her latest design project, a high-end restaurant downtown. I told her about my newfound love of running and my plans to join a local marathon. "Sounds like you're really thriving," she said, her tone warm and genuine. "Same to you," I replied. "It's good to see." As our conversation wound down, I hesitated for a moment before asking, "Want to grab coffee? There's a great place just a few blocks from here." She smiled, closing her sketchpad. "Sure. Why not?" We spent the rest of the morning talking and laughing, the conversation flowing effortlessly. It wasn't the first time we'd shared a moment like this, but something felt different this time. There was a lightness to it, a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I started spending more time together. We went on hikes, explored new restaurants, and even attended a local art exhibit she'd been excited about. It wasn't anything formal, just two people enjoying each other's company. But as time went on, I began to notice how much brighter my days felt when she was around. One evening, as we sat on a rooftop patio overlooking the city, Claire turned to me and said, "You know, I didn't think I'd ever feel normal again after what happened with Mark. But I do. And I think you had something to do with that." I smiled, her words catching me off guard in the best way. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." She laughed, shaking her head. "Guess we're even then." That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Claire. About the way she smiled, the way she listened, the way she made me feel like I could finally leave the past behind. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it. Jenna and Mark were no longer the center of my story. They were just a chapter, one that had ended, leaving room for something new. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a quiet sense of hope blooming in my chest. The months of healing, rebuilding, and rediscovery had led me here, a point of closure I never thought I'd reach. The chaos of my marriage and divorce had once felt insurmountable, a weight I'd carry forever. But now, that weight was gone, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. One evening, as I was preparing dinner in my apartment, my phone buzzed with an unexpected notification. It was a message from Jenna. "Jenna, Evan, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know." I stared at the message for a long moment, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the silence between us remain unbroken. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger over these months, saw an opportunity for finality. I typed a short reply. I accept your apology. I hope you find what you're looking for." It wasn't about absolving her. It wasn't even about her. It was about me, about letting go of the anger and resentment that had tied me to her for far too long. When I hit send, I felt an immense sense of relief. It was done, truly done. A few weeks later, Claire and I went on a day trip to the coast. We walked along the beach, the sound of the waves filling the spaces between our conversations. She had become a constant presence in my life, a source of light and stability that felt effortless and natural. As the sun began to set, we sat on a rocky outcrop, watching the sky blaze with hues of orange and pink. Claire leaned against my shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt whole. "Do you think all of this happened for a reason?" I asked, my voice thoughtful. Claire looked up at me, her eyes soft and contemplative. "Maybe not a reason," she said, "but I think we're where we're supposed to be now." I nodded, her words resonating deeply. "Yeah," I said, "I think so too." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I thought about everything that had led me here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the struggle to rebuild. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I was stronger now, more sure of who I was and what I wanted. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. Jenna and Mark were nothing more than a distant memory, a footnote in the story of my life. Claire wasn't a replacement for what I'd lost. She was something entirely new, something better. Together, we were writing a new chapter, one filled with possibility and hope. As the first stars appeared in the sky, I realized that the best was still ahead, and I was ready for it.